I think, to try and compare what Hitler and the Nazis did, the millions of people who died, the Holocaust, to the free democracies of Europe coming together to trade and to cooperate, and in the process to help secure peace on the continent of Europe, is frankly deeply offensive.
He does say they used very different methods. He's talking about the creation of a superstate.
Well, this is not the creation of a superstate. The fact is, the nations of Europe, after the horror of the Second World War, decided, by binding their economies together, in the words of the Schuman Declaration, to make a return to conflict materially impossible and unthinkable, and it has succeeded in doing that. Now, we're in a slightly different place as the UK because we're not part of the euro. The last Labour government, quite rightly, decided that we wouldn't join, and that was a very wise decision, and we're not part of the Schengen free passport arrangement. So there are different views about how Europe develops, but that's demonstrated that we are a strong and influential country in the European Union, and we're not locked in the boot of anybody's car.
Not the first politician to use Hitler's name in this EU referendum campaign. Ken Livingstone, of course, has been suspended for his comments. Do you think that Labour reacted quickly enough and fairly in his case?
Well, Ken has been suspended. Jeremy Corbyn has set up an inquiry into the problem of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party that Shami Chakrabarti is heading. We're absolutely determined to stamp it out. It's a very small number of members, but there's no place for it in Labour.
You've written in the Mail on Sunday today, you're appealing to older voters. You put that pitch across as a grandfather, you say. How worried are you about that older age group? They're more likely to vote than other age groups, but they're also more likely to vote for Brexit, according to the polls.
Well, that is what the polls indicate, you're right. And my argument is this vote, this decision we're going to make, is really about the future for our children and our grandchildren. It's not about what's happened in the past. The fact is that by cooperating together, the countries of Europe have been able to bring peace and prosperity. Britain remains a very strong and influential country, and we should think about the change we've seen in our own lives and the change that our children, our grandchildren will experience in theirs. And what we need to do is to make sure that we have the means to manage it. And Europe is one of the important means that we have got, whether it's tackling climate change, dealing with flows of refugees, making sure our economies continue to be strong based on prosperity. The economic arguments for leaving the European Union, well, they're just simply not there. And the Leave campaign are really struggling on that front because all of the warnings we've had, the Governor of the Bank of England again today, making the point we will be worse off if we leave the European Union.
They would dispute that, as you know, and they would cite their own economists. But on this issue of Europe keeping the peace, do you honestly think that if we were to leave the European Union, peace and security would be at risk?
I think it would make it harder to deal with the threats we face in the world. Let's take a very practical example, Russia. When Russia, in effect, invaded Ukraine, the countries of Europe came together and imposed sanctions on Russia. Those sanctions are hurting. President Putin would love nothing more than to see Britain leave the European Union because he would think, well, that will make us, Russia, stronger and Europe weaker. And I would secondly say this, I think we have a responsibility to honour the vision and the leadership of that post-war generation of politicians, because we take the peace that we have enjoyed in Europe since the end of the Second World War very much for granted, because it's all that we've experienced in our lives. But you look back, you visit the graveyards of the First and Second World War and see the flower of two generations of young Europeans who gave their lives in conflict. And it's really important that the means by which coming together to cooperate and trade and talk, not always to agree, but it's so much better than what went before.
And of course the Brexiteers would say it's NATO that matters and NATO won't fall apart if the UK pulls out of the EU.
It's both. You see, part of the problem with this referendum debate is that all the ills on the part of the Leave campaign are put on the European Union, and they say we should be trading with the rest of the world. We're trading with both. It is not a competition between the two, but our membership of the European Union means that Britain has a more powerful voice in the world. It also helps to ensure our security.
Some people have said that this is Labour's referendum to lose. You've got the Tories divided over the issue of Europe. Are you satisfied that the party is taking the leadership it should on the Remain vote?
I am indeed, because every sinew, every part of the Labour movement, Jeremy, the whole of the Shadow Cabinet, the vast majority of the PLP, all of the major unions, party members, we are out there campaigning, taking a distinct Labour message, because one of the reasons we're arguing for Remain is the protection of workers' rights. paid holiday, limits on working time, improvements in maternity and paternity leave. Now, those are guaranteed from John O'Groats to the Peloponnese and from Lisbon all the way to Riga. If we were to leave the European Union, the future of all of those would depend on a Conservative government.
So, some would say that workers' wages might be affected by more immigrants coming in from the EU. But let's leave that aside for the moment and let's just talk about how this campaign is being played out by Labour. Jeremy Corbyn's going on holiday just before the vote. Does that show real commitment to the cause? You're
going to see and hear a lot from Jeremy during the course of the campaign. He's already shown really strong leadership with the speeches he's made, the interventions that he's led, and his story is one of the Labour story. It's a journey from an era when we were not in favour of remaining in the then common market 41 years ago, and I think it has great force because he says, I've been on that journey and I now understand, as we do as a party and a movement, that remaining in the European Union is best for the British people and a step into uncertainty will be bad for the country, its future and the future of our children. And we need to think about the future.
A journey you've taken as well, of course, because you were pro-out in 1975. But what about the queasiness about sharing a stage with the Conservatives? Jeremy Corbyn has said he doesn't want to share a stage with the Prime Minister. But doesn't this, if this is such an important decision, doesn't it take that united push to get the vote to go your way?
Well, what is united is the view that we should remain in. But we do have different arguments. Now, it's known that if David Cameron, if he could, would have tried to weaken worker protection in the European Union, because that's been the history. Look at Chris Grayling.
But what are you worried about? Are you worried about being associated with the Conservatives? In the Scottish referendum, clearly Labour did badly. I mean, if you're worried about that, the local elections, the Scottish elections have been and gone. So what are you worried about?
It's not a question about being worried about anything. We have a distinct Labour message that we are taking to Labour voters, and the message is very simply this: it will be bad for our economy if we leave. Protecting rights, improving the environment, security, Britain's influence in the world, peace and prosperity. And I say to you, do you know, if the whole of the world could cooperate and trade and work together in the way that the European Union does, we would have a lot more peace, progress and prosperity in the world. And it seems to me that is a really powerful argument to put to the people of Britain, and that's what the Labour movement is doing.
So to push that Labour message, that the left-wing side of the argument, if you like, who would you like to come to the fore to help battle it out? We've seen John Major from the Conservatives, former Prime Minister, of course, fighting that argument. Gordon Brown has come out this week as well. Who else should come? Should we see Tony Blair, for example, join this argument?
This is such an important decision. This will affect the lives of our children and our grandchildren. And if it goes the wrong way, I think it will have a really adverse effect on what happens in the world in future. Put the European Union itself under pressure. Michael Gove appears to look forward to the European Union beginning to move apart, and I think that would be bad for all of us. It's a responsibility for every single one of us who feel passionate about the case for remaining.
So you'd welcome Tony Blair?
Welcome all voices. I'd welcome all voices taking part in this debate, and in particular speaking to Labour voters, and also the older generation who understand actually better than anyone else what conflict is like, because they've heard the stories from their parents about what happened in Europe. And for centuries, this was a conflict of continent. And what's been achieved in the last 70 years is truly remarkable, and we should honour it and we should stay in.